until true liberation comes. Family, I give thanks to the eternal wonder, the most beneficent, the most merciful, for the engagement and, as my grandmothers would say, a reasonable portion of life, health, and strength. Welcome to the inaugural Callie House Lecture, Prize, and Program of the Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation, affectionately known as CRJTR. I am Antonia Coleman, Bill's daughter, Joyce's heartbeat, the program coordinator. CRJTR is a joint initiative of McCormick Theological Seminary and the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. Thank you to our co-sponsors, Chicago Theological Seminary and Nehemiah Trinity Rising, for their support in this moment. The flow of the evening is that Dr. Brad Braxton will come first, President of the Chicago Theological Seminary, followed by David Crawford, President of my alma mater, McCormick Theological Seminary, then by the incomparable Dr. Iva Carruthers, General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference and one of the founding directors of the CRJTR, which is, say it with me if you know, the Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation. A couple of housekeeping notes. If you are not speaking, kindly mask up. Bathrooms are to the right or to your left over here, right in front of the elevators. And Dr. Carruthers said, turn your phones on silent or vibrate, preferably silent. Okay? Again, welcome. Thank you for coming, Dr. Braxton.
Good evening. I am Brad Braxton, President and Professor of Public Theology at Chicago Theological Seminary, and on behalf of our Board of Trustees and the entire CTS family, we welcome you to this event this evening. Of course, it is fitting in so many ways for us to be a partner and a sponsor, not the least of which, Dr. Iva Carruthers is a lifetime trustee, and we sure do claim her. Even if she doesn't claim us, we sure do claim her. And so it is fitting for us to be a part of this, and what a delight to be with our partners in the neighborhood and sponsoring this event. As I'm moving around this evening and renewing existing friendships and making new friendships, I am quite clear that there are Hall of Fames for basketball and baseball and football, and be very clear, in this building tonight is the Hall of Fame of social justice. Amen. I am so clear that we are in the presence of many giants tonight, and we are so grateful for your witness. And what a delight to have the sage Dr. Berry with us to enlighten us on the depths of social justice. As I was thinking about my comments, I said to myself, I should just give you a snippet of my autobiography. Before accepting this wonderful invitation to steward this historic institution, I was doing research at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, to which I'm still connected, but also I was doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work at a junior kindergarten through 8th grade school in New York City. One of my mentors, Dr. B. Herbert Martin, who served for many years in this town, told me, son, when people invite you to work with children, you are closer to heaven than when you first began. You see, we in higher education, we're very arrogant sometimes. We think that the older you are, the more you understand something about justice. If you want to know something about justice, hang out with 4th graders in New York City. So one day, as I was trying to teach social justice to 4th graders, it was very clear to me that all of my polysyllabic words were not going to carry the day, Dr. Carruthers. So I had to get down on the ground with this next generation of leaders and activists. And I said, fundamentally, justice, social justice, is about balance in the world. It's about restoring right relationships. And unfortunately, our world is a world of profound, horrific imbalance. So I want you to envision a room full of fourth graders and me on the floor with me saying, now put your arms out, and this is justice, and this is injustice. There are some people who are up here because they speak a certain language or they come from this socioeconomic status, and there are others of us who are down here for those same reasons. And wouldn't the world be much better if we went from this to this? My mama is a kindergarten teacher, and so I saw what real teaching is. That's why I got a PhD, because when you have a PhD, you just mess with people's minds at the end of the spectrum. But when you teach kindergarten in fourth grade, that's real teaching. So, Dr. Berry, thank you for all the real teaching you have done, for whatever age group you've taught to. And I'm so delighted to welcome you to this place as you help us to realize that the world ain't got to be this way, that it is possible if we learn how to play together as sacred siblings, that the world can be more like this. You are welcome in this place.
Good evening. Good evening. You can roll over McCormick. I usually get to speak first because I don't want to follow the head. It's so good to be with you all here. Thank you, President Braxton. Thanks, Anthony. Friends, welcome to this very special evening together. Let me begin by offering thanks to everyone here at Chicago Theological Seminary, all the folks whose hands and hearts have brought us together and when they worked to prepare us for this evening. Let me also take this opportunity to extend a very public welcome to your new president, President Brad Braxton. Brad, you know, we all love you over at McCormick. You all got a really good guy here. And we just can't wait to work together with you on projects like this in the future. And as Ed and Karis get here, we will look forward to welcoming them here as president. Friends, over the last 50 years or so, I've bought a few books, like many of you. Every few years, the collection gets culled a bit, and you let a few of your old friends go. But there are some books that you keep forever. They don't get buried in a closet, or in a box, or a bookcase in the basement. You keep them close at hand for reference, for guidance, and for inspiration. In the fall of 1974, I was a freshman in college, and I purchased a book written by our very special guest this evening. I believe Dr. Berry was your first book. It's called Black Resistance and White Law, A History of Constitutional Racism in America. Friends, this book was transformative for me, and no doubt for many of you and the thousands who read it. Whether studying history and government as an undergraduate, or law, or specifically constitutional law as a law student. This book provided a lens that has shaped my life and my work ever since. In no small measure, this book was one that helped guide me on my journey to this evening and this place. So I'm awed and grateful to be standing here with Dr. Berry tonight. Now, to introduce our really extraordinary special guest. It is my honor to introduce another person who has touched and inspired the lives of all of us in this room and beyond over the years. Friends, I'm honored to introduce to you the General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference and the Executive Director and Co-Founder of the Center for Preparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation, our good dear friend, Dr.
of Callie House. I thank President Braxton for his warm hospitality and I take delight as a lifetime trustee of this institution. I thank President Crawford for the extraordinary leadership that he has demonstrated as he told a bit about our shared vision for the Center for Reparations, Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation. I'm the one that needs to and how it is indeed evolving. I also am honored that I have 3 trustees from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference here with us this evening. One is Candace Simpson, who has just moved to the Chicago area. Candace, please acknowledge yourself. Stand up. We have in our midst Attorney Reggie Williams. I think he is here. Did he stay there? Our trustee, the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr. What I want to really underscore, though, is the unique position in and the potential within a global shifting landscape that this center has to stir up good trouble and to be an uncompromised moral and righteous voice to lay claim on atonement and amends for the past, but also to model the model as we offer up models for reparatory justice and a new way forward to do what you said, President Braxton, to create a different kind of balance in the world. We have gathered and launched this lecture program and prize in the name of Callie House, recognizing that she is not only the mother of the reparations movement in the United States, but she was a faithful and astute Black woman whose organization's co-founder was a minister, the Reverend Isaiah Dickerson. Her story is a story of a courageous Black woman that was unjustly incarcerated and carried her cross to the grave on behalf of future generations. We at the Proctor Conference and at the Center are launching a study program around the Till movie, which will celebrate another such courageous woman, Mamie Till. And we encourage you to use our study guide as you discuss this film and its implications with family and friends and within your faith communities. But with ancestral vision, we know that Callie House can look down this evening upon this center, this gathering, and the recent declaration of the United Nations to establish a permanent forum on people of African descent as the fruit of her sacrifices and her labor. And in the coming months and years, the center will facilitate and support reparatory justice projects, the sacred and transformative aspects of reparation projects at the local, national, and global levels. We want you to know that in this short journey, we have already helped to facilitate a $100,000 gift to the Elaine, Arkansas Reparations Center and equipped it with a computer. Silas, the Richard Wright's uncle, who had been lynched and never eulogized properly. At the national level, we are working with a body of faith leaders engaged in reparations ministry within the National Council of Churches and the Interfaith Reparatory Justice Table, seeking to create a paradigm shift and amplify models of reparations across various forms and areas of harm. At the global level, we have been invited as a consultative partner to the UK and the European Churches Legacy Center, their anti-racism roundtable. And we have hosted delegations to Africa and African sites of memory and the UN consultations. We look forward to doing much, much more of that work, as well as creating more educational resources that we will curate on behalf of those we serve. We hope that you will join us with these various calls to action and support, including as we work with others to demand that Callie House and the Callie House movement be successful as it seeks a presidential pardon for Callie House. We hope to be engaged with others as we seek to identify and properly memorialize her grave site. But this evening, we're truly blessed to have as a special midwife of the center, none other than Mary Frances Berry. A native of Nashville, Tennessee, Mary Frances Berry is a Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Social Thought and Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the author of 13 books and is working on one right now, including My Face is Black is True, Callie House and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations, published in 2005. Her illustrious public service career includes from 1980 to 2004 membership on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and from 1993 to 2004 she served as its chair. She received her PhD in history from the University of Michigan and JD from the University of Michigan Law School. She is the recipient of at least 35 honorary doctoral degrees. Now those are but a few of the biographical things to be noted, but I want to share with you the real deal. I did a little bit of research, and at a 1996 lecture at Howard University, Dr. Berry told the audience, and I quote here, "Our history is mostly survival in defiance of the law, and not because of the law. We have tried everything, and yet empowerment remains elusive for us. Lawyers are in the business of finding remedies to win. And during the Civil Rights Movement, SCLC's motto was to redeem the soul of America. But if America still refuses redemption, I guess we'll just have to figure out some way to save ourselves." Those words are today ever more relevant. Well, Dr. Berry, I spoke with the esteemed international labor leader Bill Lucy this afternoon, who you know cooked us up. He sends his best regards. And to all who are blessed to hear her this evening, he wants us to know that it was at the dining room table of Mary Berry that so much of the United States anti-apartheid movement was planned. At your table, that's where the movement was planned. In these perilous times, our challenge is to win in the courthouse and to transform in the church house. So Dr. Berry, we welcome you to help us help ourselves in this work of redemption. Thank you for coming this way. This time.
Well, Bill Lucy is my brother, he's my brother in struggle. And he's like most of us when we get, up in the years, having all kinds of medical things. But he's plugging along, and he's my brother. Let me just thank you very much, Alan. I hate to come to Chicago in the wintertime because it's cold. And I used to not care, but increasingly I don't like to be cold. So I told Ida that I would come if I came before it snowed. And so that's why she has me coming at this time. And I'm happy to be here because just in the time that I've been here today, I've had so many conversations with her and with Antonita and other people that I've learned so much. It's one of the things that I've found out over the years that whenever I go somewhere, rather than me teaching somebody else something, I learn something. I come back and I say, wow, I didn't know that you could have this take on that or the other take on that. And so I've learned a lot here. And this place is one of the most, and these programs are one of the most important things that we can have. We need as many sites as we can sustain that would be in the business of working on these issues of social justice. And this is one of the most important ones. And I want to thank the presidents, Crawford and Braxton, for being willing to have me come. Because most people who know about me know that when I come to speak, you never can tell what I might say. And my alma mater, Howard University, one of my alma maters where I was an undergrad, well, they would not ever let me come to speak. They gave me an honorary degree one time, and the president of the university told me, "You can't speak." And I said, "Why can't I speak?" And he said, "Because we don't know what you say. Just say thank you and sit down." And I went and I got the honorary degree and I did that. But then when I was running education in the federal government, the Carter administration, the president asked one of the cabinet secretaries to go to a funeral in Italy. Somebody, the prime minister, somebody who passed, and he was supposed to speak at the Howard Convention. So the president suggested that I come and speak at the Howard Convention. Since the president suggested it, they couldn't turn it down. So I went to the commencement and I got up, and the first thing I said was, "The president that didn't want me to come." Audience house. But anyway, and Andy Young told me one time that he said, "Mary Frances, you ought to start writing down whatever you're going to say, because if you just talk, you don't know what you're going to say." He said, "That happens to me, so if you write it down and you read it." But then I said, "That's not very interesting." So I write it down, but I don't always read it. I was told that I should talk about the legacy and life of Callie House as a prophetic witness on the whole issues of doing something about systemic racism and injustice and the like. Well, the first thing I guess I would ask and tell you, in case you haven't read the book or anything, you don't know what Callie House is, who was she? John O. Franklin told me that I had an idea and I should find out who she was and do something, because he said, "I don't know anything about her, and I've been doing history all these years before you were born." And I never heard of any of these people. And the way that happened is important. She was a prophetic witness. She was a courageous woman. She was a woman in charge of an organization that the federal government investigators said had 300,000 dues-paying members in 1900. At a time when women did not run organizations that had anybody except some women. There were some women organizations with women in them that people ran, but women didn't run organizations. And she, when she started out, she was helped by Reverend Dickerson, who came from the same place she did in Rutherford County, Tennessee, down in Tennessee, and it's over by Murfreesboro, plantation over there, all over. But Dickerson, most of the men, historians I know, would always tell me when I talk about her, "Well, Dickerson probably ran fast, and she was just helping him." And I said, "Well, that could not be possible, because while he was crucial to her at the beginning, with some information that he had, he died in 1909. So if he was dead, how could he still be helping her to decide to do some of the things she did?" They said, "Oh, well, we didn't realize he died." Anyway, she has lived, Callie House has lived in my mind since I was a student at the law school at Michigan, graduate school law school. And one night, a bunch of us went over to Detroit to hear John Hope speak. That was the first time I heard him speak. Later on in life, he and I became good friends, but at that time, I was just a student. And while I was standing at the reception, a man came up and started talking to me and said, "You're from Nashville, I heard." And there was a guy who worked on the line with me at Ford Motor, old guy, and he told me that there was a black woman in Tennessee that started some kind of thing to get some kind of pensions or reparations or something for us. Do you know anything about it? And I said, no, and he said, this man told me the story. And then I went to the Urban League where I do part-time volunteering and asked them, how do you find out things about people like that? And they said, well, try the National Archives. The man told me her name, so he said, next time I was in Washington, I went down to the National Archives and asked the people if they had heard of it, and they said they didn't know what I was talking about. And I didn't know it. He said, maybe you can find out. You're supposed to be learning about being a historian. And you're from Tennessee, and you should care. So the next time I went to Washington, I was lucky because when I was a student at Howard, one of our professors took us to the National Archives and introduced us to the only black woman professional who worked in all of the National Archives at the time. Her name was Sarah Jackson, Sarah Dunlop Jackson, wonderful woman. And she showed us how to use the archives, what to do, all the rest of it. To come to her, we needed anything. I went. And I told her, and she said, come on, go with me, Francis. And we went down in the basement, the bowels of the archives. And she said, see that pile of things over there in the corner? Those are the records from a trial where she was prosecuted. I said, what are they doing over there in the corner? She said, nobody ever did anything to organize them. They've been over there for years from that. So if you want to go through those, you can go through them. And to make a long story short, since I was in law school, since I was doing this other stuff, I reviewed a lot of it, and I wrote an article, which was in the Journal of Negro History, which is now the Journal of African American History, in 1972, which was what, 50 years ago? Is that right? And I wrote an article about we called it Reparations for Freedmen, Fraudulent Practices of Justice Deferred. And at the time, I didn't do any research on their background or anything like that. I just did the case. That was it. And at the end, I drew no conclusions about the case. And I went on about my business. And it was years later when Randall Robinson came out with The Dead. And I decided that I would look her up and do all the historical research on who she was, where she came from, and how she came to do, what she did, and then get a clearer picture of what was going on. And that was a project that I stopped everything else and did. Callie House, since you cannot be assumed to have read the book, very briefly I'll tell you. She was born, we think, in 1861. And she was a slave at that time. Slavery was abolished in 65, December, in Tennessee, in Rutherford County, on that plantation. Callie Guy was the name. Her husband was House. And she died in 1928. She, after during Reconstruction, they set up schools. And the black people set up their own schools, as some of you may know this, all across the South. Some of the churches did it, other people, and she went to one of these schools. And that was where she got this through the 4th or 5th grade education. And it served her very well. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But she got, by the time when she started this slave in the summer, she had been married, she had 5 children, and she was still a washerwoman. But in fact, she went to church one day, and Isaiah Dickerson was there, and he was an agent for a white guy whose name was Walter Bond, who was going around selling a pamphlet that talked about giving reparations or pensions to the old ex-slaves. And the way Bond explained it, and Dickerson explained it to the people at the church, was that he wanted to do this so some money would come to the South, to the white people in the South, and the federal government wouldn't give them anything, and they were suffering because the war was over, they lost their slaves, and there were all kinds of property problems, and the South needed to be revived. And the way to do that was to get the government to give some money to the Negroes, and the Negroes would have to spend it on the plantation where they had to work. In the company store or someplace around town, and then they would get the money. And it was an indirect way of trying to get the South together. He explained why he was doing it. Dickerson worked for him for a while because Dickerson thought that it was a good idea to try to get something for the slaves, many of whom were poor and having major problems. But after a while, he thought this is ridiculous. But he learned how the guy operated. And what he did was he got one of his congressmen to introduce bills in Congress asking for pensions and with some details about what should be done so he could say that he was doing this. And he was selling these pamphlets, the main thing that he was selling them. And what people did is they would buy them, and if they could read, they would read them. And they would pass them around to other people to read. We did that at that time with newspapers, anything we get our hands on that you could read. And people who couldn't read, somebody would read it to them. So we would know what it was. And when Callie House read this, she thought, well, I learned in the school that I went to about the Constitution. And the Constitution, she said, and she wrote this later in a letter, it gives you the right to petition your government, petition your government. And everybody can petition. It doesn't matter who you are. Petition your government. And we don't need that man to go petition for us. And he's trying to get money from these other people. We can organize ourselves and petition. So she was talking to him. And she asked him, what did he do? Proceeded. She listened very carefully to what he said about how you lobby the Congress and how you get bills and all this stuff. And she said, we can do that ourselves. So they decided that they would start an organization. And they did. And when they started the organization, it grew very rapidly. And that was because of the way they did it. The way they did it. First of all, they said, any idea that's a good idea, we'll take. If it's a bad idea, we won't. And Vaughn's folks had already outlined giving a sliding scale of pensions to people. They didn't spend a whole lot of time trying to write the bill. They put in a sliding scale. If you were over 60, 70, you get amount of money. And if you were 60, you get, and then less down the younger you were. And if somebody had to take care of you, they would get the money to take care of you. And that this would go on, and that this would be some money that would help the old ex-slaves, many of whom were poor at that time. So that she said that, and he had already sent this thing to Frederick Douglass, who Frederick Douglass finally came out and said that he supported the idea. And Frederick Douglass, as you probably know, was the most important black leader until he died in 1895, I think it was, and before Booker T and all that, in the country. And he said that even the Russian serfs, when they were given freedom, they gave them a plow, and they gave them some clothes, suit of clothes, and you folks, you didn't give us anything. So it makes it sense that you would give reparations. Most of the big people in the country, big black people, Negroes, opposed it. They said, we don't need to ask these people for anything. Some people do that now. We don't need to ask these people for anything. And who is this black woman? She's black as black, because she was a black woman. And she's not well educated. And what is she talking about? We are, as members of Congress, we had some black members of Congress during Reconstruction. They were working on trying to get a vote and to get some education money, the Lodge bill, and there was a bill for voting. They didn't ever get it, but they said they were working on that. And that they thought that she should. And so the newspapers, the black newspapers, would talk about, why is she trying to mobilize and get these slaves? They don't know anything. Ex-slaves altogether, call them ex-slaves. And so she never could get any good press because of who she was. She was at the bottom of the social ladder, if I might put it that way. But she then was able to get people to join, and they would pay 10 cents for dues if they had 10 cents. And some of the records of the organization are poignant. I found records of one of the local chapters, one out in Missouri someplace. There were chapters all over the country. everywhere there were any black people. In Oklahoma, and New York City, and all over the South, everywhere there were chapters. And her children, there was 5 children, the oldest ones had gotten old enough that they could take care of the youngest ones when she was away. So she went traveling around, going places, talking to people in churches, mostly churches, meeting with people in churches. And the main thing she did was to listen to people, tell their stories. She had a penchant for letting them tell, even though she heard these stories, and even these things that happened to her and members of her family, she would sit for hours listening to people and their stories, and they reported this in the minutes of whatever meetings that they had in this, and how she sat there and how she listened, and how she, you know, she took them in. They believed that she, in fact, understood what was going on with them, and that they were willing to try whatever it was. And they would put things in the ledger book, like Joe was supposed to pay 10-cent due, he ain't got 10 cents. They wrote that down. When he get some money, he gonna get some. But he got 2 cents, so he gave us 2 cents. Small amounts of money like that. And people really old, Crazy Mac, who they wrote down, Crazy Max was 89 years old, and she was also already the housekeeper and the cleaner and the cook for the people she worked for in slavery. Still there. And she was there, said, because no, she didn't have nobody to take care of her. So she's still working there. And they put all this information down. And what Callie House said she wanted to do was to get the name of everybody who had been a slave on these petitions that they were going to send to the Congress, and they sent them, the ones that they got. And I put some in the, you can see them in the book. You can see what they did. You put down the name, who owned you, where it was, and all anything else that was relevant to that. And she said, I'm going to get every name, and then if they ever give us something, I don't know if they ever do, but if they do, then I want them to have the names of the people. I've said to people, you should go there and look and see if there's anybody from your family that's there. That's too hard. I guess you can just go to, what is that thing where you check your lineage by sending off the center swab or something. That's easier to go to the archives. But I guess, all right. So she got all that stuff. And they sent the petitions. Well, she didn't know this, because there was no way for her to know. But in the archives, there were all these discussions going on in the federal government about what she was doing. They said, who is this woman and what is she trying to do? They got all these letters. I got them out of the pension files and out of the Justice Department files. All over the South, white people wrote and said, this woman is down here, and I don't know what these Negroes are doing, but they go to church, and they all come out happy and singing about, we gonna be all right. And what are they talking about? Are they getting ready to do something? What is going on? You got to stop her. Who is she? Why don't you do something to stop these people? And so they sent out some people, this always happens as part of our history, to do surveillance on them, spies. They sent some people down to the church. Various churches, to report back on what they were doing. And the people came back and said, well, we didn't see them doing anything, except they were talking about trying to get the federal government to give them something to make them better off because they had worked hard during slavery. And then they had services, and they prayed and carried on. And then they got up and they all left, and they were singing, and they went on down the street. And she got their names down and all the rest of it. So we don't see what they were doing that had anything to do with putting them in jail or doing anything. That didn't satisfy. The letters kept coming, and they came from everywhere. Finally, they had this meeting, and they said, this woman is going to run the Negroes wild. We've done the numbers, and this thing is growing like crazy. And if, in fact, they find out we're not going to give them anything, and you know that we're not going to give them anything, they're going to be mad, and we're going to have a race control problem. She's running the Negroes wild. She's making anarchists of them. And remember, the meeting at which she was named Assistant Secretary in Action Days at the Brother Place was 1898, and then we had, around that time, all the labor disputes. And before that had been Haymarket and all the stuff about anarchism and all the rest of it. So they said, this woman is some kind of revolutionary, whatever it is she's doing. And why is she sending all these petitions up there to the Congress? And the Congress, you know, they would get them and receive them, and then they wouldn't act on them, but they're in the archives, the National Archives, because they keep all that stuff. So they said, what are we going to do? So they said, here's what we'll do. We'll stop her from using the mails, and then she won't be able to get in touch with it back, and the whole thing will die. So they issued a fraud order saying they couldn't use the mails in any way because they were engaged in fraud. And when she got the letter, she didn't know anything that we know, that I just told you. She couldn't figure out why they were doing this. She said to herself, and she sat down and she wrote back to them. She said, I learned in school that we have a right to petition our government. And all that we're doing is petitioning. So I don't understand why you're writing me this letter. I don't understand why people who during slavery worked us to death, now whipped us, now they want to starve us to death, and all we're doing is asking for some help. So I don't know why you don't want us to, why are you sending this? And I don't understand what you're doing. And so they had to sit down and figure out what to do. They told all the post offices not to let them send anything. That meant they had to use Railway Express, like Federal Express, which is expensive. It means that they had to travel more, to go places, to stay in touch with people, which they hadn't had to do as much as before. It made it harder. And she really didn't understand why they objected to them asking the government to do something. And so they kept on working. Finally, she said, the government is not doing anything and the people are going to be demoralized if something doesn't happen. So she said, I think what we ought to do, you know, she wasn't Malcolm X, but she believed in using everything that came to hand. She said, we ought to sue them. Because she read in the paper, which was in all the black papers, that there was some cotton piled up, a tax on some cotton that they'd gotten from the Confederates, and they were trying to figure out what to do with the money, thousands and thousands of dollars. And she said, well, we planted the cotton and picked it, so they ought to give us that as the pensions. So she was smart enough. She really had a whole lot of intelligence, mother wit, and everything else. She went and she said, I'm going to find the best lawyer. And she found Cornelius Jones, who was one of two black lawyers who had argued cases before the Supreme Court, and who were well known to the bar. And they were part of the elite in the black community. And newspapers wrote celebratory columns about the different things that they did and so on, unlike her. So she talked him into being a lawyer and said, would you bring the case? Because we need to move on this. And he said, I don't know if we can win, because they may tell us that the government doesn't want us suing them. There's something called sovereign immunity, that the government can't be sued unless it wants to be. Now there's some loopholes for that. But I'll bring the case. It's a good case. And so he brought it. It was headline news in all the black papers that he was bringing this case. And most of them didn't even mention her. They just talked about he was bringing this case. And then he brought the case in 1950, and it was the first federal court case filed to get reparations for black people. And the court did what, in the lower court, did what he thought they were going to do. They didn't throw out the complaint. They didn't say it was invalid. They just said, we think because of sovereign immunity, we can't consider it. So he appealed. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they turned it down. But it was the first one, which means that some lawyers think, all those lawyers who later on brought reparations cases, that the waiver system we have now, getting around sovereign immunity, may be a way that they could use in their litigation strategies some of the stuff that he did. Now, for his trouble, Cornelius Jones, the Pension Bureau, went after him for having the nerve to bring this case. And they tried to put him in jail, said he was engaged in helping them with fraud and blah, blah, blah. And the only reason why he got out of it eventually was because he was well known to everybody. He was part of the group, of the leadership group. And the whole bar knew who he was. And they said, this is ridiculous. The man is just, doing this. Now, then they decided, we got to get her. We got to stop her. So they brought a fraud charge against her. And they took her to court, federal district court in Nashville, all-white jury, and said that she was engaged in using the mails to defraud anyway because they found some flyer that somebody sent. And here was the way it was described. At a time when she should know that the government was likely not to do something, she organized people to get the government to do it. One of my lobbyists, big-time lobbyist buddies in Washington said to me, he said, that's what I do every day. They should put me in jail. That's the whole point. Trying to get the government to do something. And they couldn't find anything where she said the government is going to do it or has done it or whatever. All they could find is her saying, well, I don't know when it's going to be done, but whatever, we should, keep on doing this. So the case in Nashville, the papers just excoriated her, the white newspapers. They called her that little, dumpy, ugly black woman. Like they did a lot of black people in that day. And talked about her, called out of her name, and everything else about her. Black people came from everywhere, all around, and were outside the courthouse, singing and moaning and groaning out there. What are we going to do? Oh, and they were praying and doing everything they could out there. It was such a, and the newspapers said, they are a spectacle. Somebody should whip them back to work. Instead of being out there crying and carrying on about that dumpy with the little old black woman and whatever she's done. And they convicted her, obviously, all white male children and so on, and sent her to prison in Jefferson City, Missouri. They had no women's prison then, men's prison in the separate part of it. And the people outside stayed outside when they announced that they were sentencing her. And they were still out there praying and singing and all the rest of it, and she went to prison. Now, the movement didn't stop. At first I thought, well, that's the end of the ex-slave pension movement because Dickinson died in 09, and now you got her at 16, and what's going to happen? She went back to Nashville, moved back into the shotgun house that she lived in before. They kept saying she had a lot of money from the movement. They couldn't find any money because she didn't have any. She lived in this shotgun house down, if you know Nashville, there's a place called the Gulch that's got a whole lot of shopping and stuff, fancy stuff. But it used to be a slum, and I lived in it when I was in the orphanage and when I lived with my aunt down there in the slum. And she lived there, and she had a shotgun house. If you don't know what that is, it means you can stand in the front and look all the way out to the back of the house. So we call it shotgun. And she took it and washed it again, and so on, which is what they had her doing in prison too. And an anarchist named Emma Goldman was in prison with her. They were in prison together, if any of you know that. You want to look that up. And it was wonderful because Goldman wrote a whole memoir on the daily activities in the prison, which was very useful to me when I went out to the prison and I couldn't envision what was happening at that time. Anyway, she got sick and she died of cancer, uterine cancer. The doctors came at the end. They said she didn't have any treatment or anything. They couldn't do anything. So she died. She's buried in a cemetery in Nashville that was set up by the Benevolent Brothers of Lodge something black men years ago during Reconstruction. And the graves are unmarked. because nobody's taking care of them. And I walked out there with my nephew trying to make sure I find her grave. I know she's buried there, but I haven't found it yet. Now, the movement didn't die. That's what's important. And the legacy of her, well, first, the movement didn't die. I found chapters. People who were in the chapters of her movement were in Marcus Garvey's chapters. I'm on the board of the Garvey papers, and in the appendix of the volumes, we have the names of members, and some of them were people who came out of the ex-slave pension movement and went into the Garvey movement. Queen Mother Moore was in the New Orleans chapter of the ex-slave pension movement and went into the Garvey movement. All these people, she was in the Garvey, and then later on started her own movement, the one in New Orleans, chapter in New Orleans, with these other people. But that happened. And then I found some of the chapters were still working. One of the keys to Callie House and what she was doing was mutual assistance. That was one key. She said, we want the pensions, but we also have to help each other. Mutual assistance was very important to people at that time in the community and the churches. And so she said, we want to bury the dead, we want to help the sick, we want to take care of each other with the little bit that we have. Collect all you have and join together and collect and take care of each other. That was one of the things that she always talked about. And the other thing about Callie House is when I was researching her, people who knew her, and I knew her or were related to her, denied it. Because they said, one woman I got on the phone, she said, my husband, I know is related to that woman, but he'd be mad at me if I told you that. Because she was a criminal. She went to jail. After I wrote the book, they all sent me stuff about, yeah, she was mine. I would have sent you a picture of me, my great-grandmother, So she had many, many relatives after that. Also, many people sent me the badge from the organization, it's in the book. And many people sent me information about badges that they found in their family papers that they didn't know what it was, or information about it, and relatives who belonged to this movement all over. And it flowed right into Marcus Garvey's movement. There were chapters, the Atlanta chapter, I found papers from them where they kept up the mutual assistance part. They just kept on, and then they kept sending petitions about the reparations. And then it all flowed, and they used the same tactics on Marcus Garvey that they used for her, using the mails to defraud, because the government's not ever going to give you anything. So why are you getting all these people riled up thinking about this? But the other thing that she understood, some of you may know a song by Gil Scott-Heron called Reparation for My Soul. He also did The Revolution Will Not Be Televised and all that stuff. And all that talking with people and listening to people and the things she said, she knew that it wasn't just that people had been enslaved and they had lost economic resources. I have to explain this over to my good friend Sandy Derry, that it's the material part is important. But the soul, the spirit, your psyche, the trauma of all the things that have happened and the disruption of people's lives and their families and the seeking relatives, finding your folk and not finding them or whatever, as you need reparation for your soul. And part of it comes from listening, having people listen to your story and let you tell everything that you knew about the relative that you haven't seen since I don't know whatever, and all of that. And she was very much concerned about that. And also the self-help, we are in this together, we got to be, and her belief that that the church, it's the church and the public square, all together, and the government, all together, working on these issues. The other thing about her legacy is she believed in, she said, my heart and soul is in this movement, and I'm willing to do whatever needs to be done. And my face is black as true comes from a letter she wrote to them and said, please tell me why you're going after us and doing all of this. My face is black as true, but that's not a reason for you to be doing this. I'm proud of who I am, but why are you doing this? And she kept going back and back. Education, it tells us. We talk about CRT and the fight over that and what's in schools. If they hadn't had that school and they hadn't had teaching about the Constitution, she wouldn't have known that you could petition your government. How many of our children know that? How many of them know that the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, that the one prevailing purpose of it was to give equality and freedom to black folk as a result of what we experienced? How many of them are taught that in schools? How much do we go and fight in school boards and other places to make sure that the folks who are fighting over the issue as they have defined it don't get to define it in a way that our children are not taught what they should know? Because if they were taught what they should know, some of them might have more hope, which might interfere with some of the behaviors that they engage in that are not good for them. Okay, so she held on to that and believed in that. And the other thing is persistence. I was telling a group I was talking to, and I was telling them and the rest of this morning that the main thing you must do when you're in struggle is you must be persistent. I wrote another book called History Teaches Us to Resist, in which I talk about how people organize and what succeeded and what hasn't succeeded. The main thing is persistence, that being able to stay in the struggle and work for whatever it is you're working for, no matter what, and to be able to be flexible so that if you have to change direction or you have to do something or figure out a way to reframe or to do whatever or to respond, be willing to do that for the overall goal of whatever it is you're trying to do. You know, some people get into organizations and they think, well, the way we've been doing things all the time is the way we're still going to do it. No matter what happens. And if anybody suggests a new way to do something or another avenue where you might strengthen the organization, they don't want to do it. Because they say it was good enough for granddaddy and daddy, it was good enough for me. But that doesn't get you anywhere. The other thing is she didn't have social media, but we have it. And if you have social media, some people think that social media is a movement. And it can get you everything. What it can get you is you can use it to organize, and you don't have to use mimeograph paper, get ink all over your hands, and do all that kind of stuff. But in fact, you can't make change that way. You can get celebrity like that, but you cannot make change of it. You have to be in person, and you have to take time. And taking time to listen to people. That's one of the main things that I learned from the Callie House. Listen. I try to everywhere I go. I talk a lot and tell people stuff, but then I want to listen to see what their problem is and their story, to see if there's anything I can say about it. And so that is the story of Callie House. And someday we'll find a marker for her grave. Maybe somebody will go down there again and walk around there like my nephew and I do. We do it more than once. Just keep looking and seeing what we can find and turning up. And the reparations cause, of course, it hasn't won yet, and it may. So what she really wanted, and that hasn't happened, but maybe someday it will. And if we continue to believe in it, and if each generation will continue the struggle and persist in it, I always say each generation must make its own dent in the wall of injustice. She made hers, and so other people should follow in her path and do the same thing. Thank you very much. something, you know, let's have a little interaction. Anybody got a question that you can ask, throw me off balance and maybe not know what to say, a criticism or something to add or anything, or you want to testify, or what? Yes.
I'm struck by one of the last comments you made about each generation being responsible for making its own dent in the walls of injustice. I'm interested in what you would say is the most important dent over the next decade that needs to be made by, call it the millennial generation.
I think there are, you know, we got a whole bunch of problems and issues, and we always do. But I think the miseducation of the Negro is the main problem. That's a Carter G. Woodson program, miseducation. And the education that children are offered doesn't suit them to deal with the challenges that we face, in my opinion. Even the people who go to private schools, they learn certain things that children who are in public schools don't learn, deficits. But having taught some of them at Penn from all these different places, they are still unequipped because their vision of who we are and what the world is and what capitalism is and how they should fit into it is not going to get black people over, okay? It just isn't. And they may get individual success and do something, but they're not going to, you know, do this struggle because that's not their worldview. And stuff is not added to what they teach. I go and talk sometime at some of these private prep schools that feed the students from Japan and other places. And they just aren't getting that. They're getting other stuff, but they're not getting that. And the kids in the bad schools, in my opinion, aren't getting appropriate education because they're not taught the things that they need, basic skills in the first place, and then the other things that they need to get. The education that our people get, and it doesn't make them psychologically fit to engage in the kind of warfare, and I don't mean violence, that must take place to make the other kind of change. They're not fit to make the arguments. They can't answer back. They don't know how to strategize. They have a lot of anger. And anybody would be angry if they can't see a way out and this is the only thing they think they can do. You'd be angry. And so I think working on trying to figure out how to deliver education, if we have to do it ourselves. I sometimes think, I get up in the morning and I call a bunch of people at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and wake them up. I don't think I called you too early, but I have a habit of doing that. And say, why don't we just start the freedom schools again?
Yeah.
And why don't we just teach our children? And then I go into a rant, or whoever is calling me at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning about if we did that, at least we'd know what we were teaching the children. You know, if we figured out some way to do that. I mean, if those people who have the Jewish schools in New York State the Orthodox can do their own schools, do whatever they want to do, there's no reason why we can't if people have the will to do it. We have, that would erode some of the class problem we have. We have a class problem in the black community. Okay? We have a class problem in the black community. I really don't believe, from all the people that I interact with and know, I don't think they really care about poor black people. I really don't. They say they do. Oh, we care about, poor black people. We care about what they really care about is themselves and their belief and what they do. Because even when some of the boards I'm on, even when they talk about what to litigate, often what they're litigating is not something that's going to help, the people further down. And their perception of how to go about it is not going to deal with the crux of what their problems are. There should be more, my colleague Dorothy Roberts has a new book about the foster care system and how terrible it is. Anybody who's ever sat in the courtroom and watched in family court what they do when they give people's kids to other people, or if you know anything about the foster care system at all, you know how rotten the whole thing is for kids. There ought to be lawsuits about that. I mean, if you're going to litigate something, then maybe that. So I think education, and I don't mean educating, when I say that, at one time when people said educate, they meant we should teach people to love each other. Well, I know people should love each other, and we should do that. But I'm talking about educating people to think so that they can think strategically. I mean, Callie Alice, she wasn't all that well educated, but she knew that titianing your government, what that meant, and what you were supposed to do. And she found out from people how you go about titianing them, But a start, and I also think that people should get into the fray over education. And I don't mean, as much as I love my dear brother, Ibram Kendi, I don't mean teaching people how not to be racist or how to be anti-racist. That's fine. But I'm talking about in the fray over education at the grassroots level. There are all these other folks going to see what's being taught to their kids, and you saw on Zoom some of it. And there are things that we know that would make them better able to strategize and to take hold of what they have to deal with in the world. We ought to get into that fight. Yes.
Dr. Perry, thank you for sharing your time and your fascinating story with us. I'm just curious about how you became so enthralled with the story of Callie House, and because I'm so grateful that you were able to, dive deep into her story, and so then share it with the rest of the world. Share with us how it came about and how you were so enthralled with her story.
Well, how I became interested and enthralled with her story. Well, I was prepped psychologically to do that. When I was a student at Michigan, I was in the anti-war movement. And I write about this in History Teaches Us to Resist, or the chapter on it. And I got involved when a friend of mine told me about some black soldiers who had come back and who were traumatized and had PTSD and some other stuff that happened. And I was reading about what happened to soldiers generally, and I didn't believe in the whole war thing in the first place. And I decided one summer that I would go to Vietnam and find out what was going on for myself, because I'm always trying to find out what's going on for myself. And I didn't tell my family that I was going to go, because I knew they would tell me I was crazy, because it was a war. And I didn't know how I would go, so I talked to I wrote a letter to the folks at the Pentagon and asked them, how do you go to Vietnam? How do you get to go to Vietnam? And they wrote back and said, you can't unless you are in the military or you're a reporter. So I thought about that, and I wrote back and said, well, how do you get to be a reporter? They said you have to have a certain number, they gave me the number of subscribers to the press that you're writing for. They were thinking about it. And you send us their endorsements that you work for them as a war correspondent. You're their war correspondent. And we'll give you credentials, and you can go. Otherwise, you can't. So I went over to the Michigan Daily newspaper, which had something like 70,000 subscribers, and said, hey, you guys want to have a war correspondent? And they said, yeah, who? I said, me. They said, oh, okay, well, we don't have any money. I said, I'm not asking you for money. I just want you to write a letter saying I'm your war correspondent. And they did. And then I went to all the little towns around Ann Arbor, asking people if they wanted a war correspondent. They all said, hey, that'd be great. If you just also write some hometown news, if you write it to anybody from this town, write a little thing, send it back on the telex. And so I got them all to write letters, and the Pentagon sent me my credentials and the information of where I showed up in Saigon at the press place to get my gear, because I had to get the military gear. And they said, you have to get there on your own. We don't, how do you get there? Sure, the people who are, you're working for, I guess they'll get you there. But here, once you're there, and you can live with wherever the officers eat, you can eat there, drink, and be okay with them. Out in the field, just do whatever, go anywhere you want to go. They didn't have embedding anybody in those days. And so I didn't have any money to catch the plane to go. I thought, how am I going to get So I went around and begged folks on campus who were with me in the movement, and we raised enough money for me to get a plane ticket. So I got a round trip ticket to go. And I was on the plane, and the plane stopped in Guam and various places. And there were real reporters on the plane, like real people who worked. And they said to me, who do you work for? And I told them my story, and they just died laughing. They just fell out. Well, I've had some wonderful reporters. And they started giving me tips about how to do reporting, this and that. And one of them gave me a little notebook he had, and he gave it to me, which I still have because I wrote notes. And he said, you might want to write some notes. Here, take this. You can have this. I got another one. And when we stopped in Bangkok, and a guy got on the plane, black guy, he sat down next to me and we started talking, and he was one of my older brother's frat brothers. I didn't know him. And he said, I told him the story. He said, what? He said, well, where are you going to stay when you're in Saigon? I said, I don't know. He said, well, I work for USAID, AID, and I'm a foreign service officer. And there are 3 of us, and we got a big house in Saigon. So when you come back from the field, stay with us. We have servants and all that. Bring your dirty clothes and stay with us. And he said, when we leave here, go with me. I'll go down with you to get your gear and all the rest. And so he did. His name was Julius. And so when I was in town, I stayed with them. And I just went over and picked up with the first group I saw and said, where are you going? And they told me. I went out with them, and I was everywhere from down at the bottom of Vietnam all the way up to the DMZ with Army, Marines, the Navy, the Koreans, everybody else. And what I did is I wrote and telex back a big story every week saying where I was and what I thought overall. And then when I met people who were from these towns, I did interviews. Some of them got killed. It's very depressing. But it's war. And then, there were sad stories like the young black guy who I was interviewing, and he said, you write down what I say. When reporters talk to me, they never write down what I say, and I keep wondering when I'm gone, is anybody going to remember me? And I said, I'll remember you. I'll remember you. And I said, I'll write it down because I'm new to this and I don't know what I'm doing. These people, they probably know enough, they don't need to write anything down. But I said, dude, and he said, I don't even know what we're doing here. And I met all these guys who didn't know what they were doing. And they sent a sergeant with me, a rather senior sergeant who was a little overweight, and he was supposed to go around with me to keep me from getting killed. Because right before I got there, a Life magazine photographer whose name was Dickie Chappelle, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner, stepped on a landmine and she got killed. And she was the only American reporter around there in the area she was in. So they told this guy, your job is to see to it that she doesn't get killed. And his problem was, I could walk faster than him, I could run faster than him, and he was always puffing and puffing and trying to find me. And I was gone to where it was, and he was trying to find me. And there were lots of poignant stories, lots of sad stories, lots of things with people getting killed and things like that. But anyway, I was primed when I came back from there. When I saw somebody like Callie House, or the idea of her, she was me. I mean, I'm always going where no one's gone before, or thinking of things people didn't think of before. And I was fascinated by how could a woman at the time that we're talking about be doing this? I don't get it. And so I had to find out about it, but it warmed my soul, just to know that there was something like this. And so I had just done that, and then I'd come back, and on a plane, when I changed planes somewhere, I read that the Detroit riots had taken place. And Rosa Parks, who I hadn't been around a lot, I went up to Detroit when I got back, and they were having the hearings on what happened during Detroit, and that's when I got a chance to be with her son. And so I had experiences that made me into an outlaw. And maybe I was one to begin with, but she was an outlaw. So, if that answers your question.
Dr. Mary?
Yeah.
We have time for one more question, and that will come from Pastor Reggie.
Dr. Barry, can you just tell us, just based on everything that you shared and kind of how you're feeling just about the times we're living in, how are you feeling about the times, I don't know a better way to put it, just about your perspective of the times we're living in, given COVID and given all of the calamity around how our people are treated, and you spoke just a bit about with regard to how our kids are being taught. Can you just speak just a bit about that?
Oh, well, we have, people are always telling me that something is unprecedented. I never use that term, because there's nothing new under the sun. Okay? And so these are terrible times, but there have been terrible times before. And in fact, what it means when you have terrible times is that it is even more important that you struggle and press against whatever is happening. Okay? I see when things happen, bad things happen to us, like bad things happen to good people. That's just another time to just keep on pressing. And I also don't romanticize, and I also don't exaggerate the times. People say, we never had. I was on Fireline one time about a month or so ago, and they said that there's never been a time when anybody challenged the vote of electoral vote count. This has never happened. This was on Fireline. And I said, you're wrong. I said, do you remember Bush v. Gore? Do you remember when a whole bunch of House members, including some of my good political friends, like Maxine and others, marched over to the Senate and demanded that Al Gore not count those votes because black voters had been, and disabled voters and the like, had been prevented from voting, even though they were registered and all the rest. I said, don't you remember that? And they told me, well, that never happened. This is on national TV, live TV. And I said, it's live and you can't take it off unless you put something else in. I said this on the TV. But I said it happened. Anybody that goes look at history. They had two so-called historians who are always showing up talking about presidential historians, they call themselves, who are always on TV, who were on there with me, two white guys. It didn't matter if they were white, but they were white boys. They were on there, and I know them. And they said, well, they were trying to agree with the model bit. Yeah, this is not, and I said it again, and then finally they said, well, yeah, she's right. And then I said, the only difference, and I said, what about in 1877? I know that's far back for you historians. When in fact, the vice president, when they presented the slates to him of the electoral votes, he said, I'm not counting them because it's two slates. Tell me which one is the right one, and I'll count them. Otherwise, I'm not counting them. You guys figured out he got up and left. And they set up a joint commission to figure out which ones were the right ones before they got counted. I said, so this is not new. The difference here is that there was violence that took place at the Capitol. And if people engaged in violence and hurt people and this thing, they should be punished. But that isn't everything that you going around talking about this is unprecedented and this never happened before. It has. So I don't believe our democracy is in danger of being undermined and whatever these people say, because it's already undermined. If you get my point, it has been undermined. We have never had pure democracy in this country. Okay, so when people say that on TV, I think, what are they talking about? Where have they been? Where was this pure democracy that they saw? This is a different take on it. But it's not the same, it's not unprecedented. So, the main thing is that most of us hated Trump so much politically. Okay, I don't mean hated him as a person, but the politics. That we, in fact, if somebody says Trump, we say, yeah, I'm against that. Without even finding out what they get ready to say. And forget Trump, you know. In fact, what is going to happen, and there are election deniers, probably some in this room. I'm an election denier. You know what I deny? I deny that Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. I'm an election denier. I deny that Al Gore Jr. got defeated by George W. Bush. They gave the election to him. So I'm an election denier. There's nothing illegal in our system of government denying that you believe somebody got elected. What is the local level or wherever it is, what's wrong is you try to engage in violence to try to make somebody do something. The other thing is the main problem, somebody asked me there what I thought people should do, like in education, I said, drugs. The drug problem is having a more detrimental effect on the lives, the well-being, the psyche of young people. A lot of people who aren't young, but young people generally in this country, and causing all kinds of havoc. We need a full core press. When people say, what are the most important issues? I don't see that on the list at all. The list that I see when I turn the TV on, they have other important issues. Inflation is an important issue. Crime, as they've defined it, is an important issue. But I don't see them trying to get rid of the drug problem, which has destroyed people's lives. I know some people personally and families where there's been total destruction of their young people in their family as a result of all of this. So all of that. So I worry about those things. I don't think anybody's going to overthrow the government of the United States and our democracy, which is enshrined in whatever it is going to be made imperfect. It's already imperfect. What we're trying to do is make it more perfect. So that's my take.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Berry. I would like for President Crawford and Dr. Carruthers to please come join me. And you too, Dr. Berry. Yes, ma'am. I need to. Dr. Mama Ivy said I need to read this, so I need my assistant. The Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation, McCormick Theological Seminary, and Samuel Whit Proctor Conference, Incorporated. My face is black, is true, but it's not my fault. But I love my name and my honest in dealing with my fellow man, Callie House, 1899. Proudly present the inaugural Callie House Prize to Mary Frances Berry, Esquire. The Callie House Prize is given to one whose legacy of service and advocacy on behalf of righting wrongs, repairing the harm, making restitution, and engendering transformation of organizations and individuals for the transgenerational trauma experienced by people of African descent from the myriad acts of and consequences of the transatlantic slave trade system, and whose legacy of leadership will light the path for many to come. Whereas Mary Frances Berry has reclaimed the memory of Queen Mother Callie House by her groundbreaking book, My Face is Black is True, Callie House and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations. Whereas Mary Frances Berry has been a quintessential, outstanding global citizen and civil servant of human rights for all. And whereas Mary Frances Berry has demonstrated unparalleled contribution to the academy, justice, and human rights movements and organizations as scholar, teacher, mentor, advocate, and activist. The Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation is honored and humbled to welcome Mary Frances Berry as the inaugural Callie House Lecturer for the Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation, and affirm our vision to emulate her steadfast excellence in the pursuit of human justice presented this 18th day of October in the year of our Lord 2022. Signed by Dr. Iva Carruthers, Samuel Witt Proctor Conference Incorporated, and David Crawford, President of the McCormick Theological Seminary. Thank you. So the prize, okay. Oh my gosh, this has been an amazing day. So we are giving Dr. Berry a prize, a monetary prize, and I think that's in Dr. Carruthers' pocketbook. And Dr. Berry has so graciously said that she will return the prize back to the center to help continue our work. So thank you.
I wanted to get to say that myself.
Oh.
But I decided that I would just give it back to the side. I don't need anybody to give me a prize at this stage, money at this stage of my life. So to continue your work, you keep the prize. And it's a wonderful prize. And so maybe next year you give it to somebody who needs it. So.
Getting to know you, and yes, you will have a ride home from the airport when you get back to DC. And thank you, Dr. Carruthers and Dr. Crawford, President Crawford, I'm sorry, for this opportunity and having this event. Dr. Braxton, thank you so much, and Michelle Day, thank you so very much. Now, I have a few announcements. There is food in the next room with plates. You are to please take them, but don't take my plate. Amen? Okay. And before we go, I need for everyone to check under the left side of your chair. Do you feel anything? It's right at the end. Do you feel it? You should feel a piece of tape. None of y'all said got a piece of tape. Uh-oh, we have 1, that's 2, 3, 4, Each of you will get an autographed book from Dr. Berry. So raise your hand. And in addition, in your chairs, you received this announcement that I am most excited about. Y'all just don't know how I am excited about this particular discussion guide that is going to be released sometime this week. And so you can connect with me for more information on how to obtain it. We want to continue the movement forward of truth-telling and honoring sacred memory. Do you like the logo for the center? That's good to hear. The logo, the Sankofa, is grounded in the spirit of remembrance, righteousness, and repair of the breach, going back to bring forth the new creation, Mr. Herb. And now, with goodness and mercy as our rear guard, let the cloud by day and the fire by night go before you to make your way soft, easy, successful, peaceful, prosperous, and abundant your way. Adonai, hear the prayers from this place. Do not give us over to the will of the enemy. Cut us off from the enemy's plan, both spoken and unspoken. Let the voice of the marginalized ring forth. In the name of the risen Afro-Palestinian wonder, Ashe and Amen. Amen. See y'all. Thank you for coming.